Howard Megdal, welcome to the Baseball Bookshelf Conversations.
It is so nice to see you, Ron. I just need to point out you wrote the very first review of my very first book back in 2009, and it meant a lot. Your platform to do so was something that was very significant to me. But as you well know, we don't see each other as often as we should, and I am always excited to chat with you.
Well, the feeling is very mutual. And of course, you were talking about the new edition of the Baseball Talmud, uh, which is more than a decade in coming. Well, the
Mhm.
first thing I want to get out of the way with is the there are a lot of people, especially in the more liturgical community, let's say, who are very specific about what constitutes being a
Mm,
Jew.
yeah.
There is a publication called the Jewish Sports Review.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so their criteria was one parent had to be Jewish. Usually it's the mother that has to be Jewish. So
Mhm.
they were pretty liberal in that one parent that they, this doesn't sound right, came out as Jewish and they didn't adhere to any other religion. What is your criteria for inclusion in this book?
I tried to be as wide ranging as possible. My thinking about this in general is that, among other things, that making that decision is above my pay grade for another to exclude people who others might expect to be in that book, I think is limiting. How I have always suggested is if you felt very strongly that somebody shouldn't be in the book, you could just take a pen and cross that person out, and then your book is fully complete. Whereas if somebody you expected in the book is not in the book, you'd have to email me. I'd have to separately add a section to every single book, maybe with a stapler. I don't know how we do it on a mass quantity production. So from my perspective, that was the way in which we handled it, which is to say, if a portion of the Jewish people would consider you to be Jewish or you self-identified as Jewish, that was good enough for me.
And what about a case like Ross Newen?
Well, Ross, of course, the father, the great sports writer, David Nuhan, the son, who was a Messianic Jew, a Jew for Jesus in the parlance of the term. And I included him because he identifies as Jewish. Whatever my feelings are about Messianic Judaism, he is in there. And of course, I note the way in which he is linked and connected to the Jewish people.
Well, let's go back a few decades and talk about Buddy Meyer.
Oh, yeah. Well, now Buddy Meyer is not in this version of the book. He was in the first edition of the book, but there's been some research uncovered since then that is very significant, which is to say, Buddy Meyer was identified as Jewish in various publications, but he did not identify as Jewish. He simply did not want to correct the record because he was afraid it would be taken as anti-Semitic. He had no issue with it. And so at some level, I love that Buddy Meyer was so respectful of the Jewish people that he didn't want to make it seem as if there was some reason to object to it. In the same way, it reminds me of Colin Powell's answer about Barack Obama being Muslim, where he said he's not, but more to the point, why would it matter if he were? And so Buddy Meyer was operating, I think, under similar principles, and I respect the hell out of it. But no, that doesn't make him Jewish.
Now, just to clarify, Buddy Meyer was an outstanding second baseman for a long time for the Washington Senators. I remember a piece by not Maury Povich, Shirley Povich, Maury's father, Shirley Povich, the venerable writer for the Washington Post, who covered a Yankee game in which Ben Chapman, who was notorious for his dealings with Jackie Robinson as manager of the Phillies,
Mhm.
uh, slid into him in second base and spiked him. And Povich wrote that he carved a swastika on Meyer's thigh. And even then, Meyer wouldn't say, what are you bothering me for? I'm not Jewish. You're right. He was very respectful. And if I'm not mistaken, Buddy Meyer is in the International Jewish Sports Hall of Fame.
He is, and that is my favorite part of it. He was actually honored by the National Jewish Sports Hall of Fame, and nevertheless continued to be supportive of this idea, even though if you'd asked him, he and did in fact quietly said, no, I'm not Jewish, but he didn't make any effort to push back against it. And again, a baseball player at that time as an ally to the Jewish community in this way strikes me as a perfectly reasonable member of the National Jewish Sports Hall of Fame. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think you think that seems like a reasonable
I think
way
it's a great,
forward for them?
I think it's a great story, and I respect the hell out of him for it, especially in that time where it wasn't, people weren't politically correct and they didn't really need to do something like that.
Oscar Schindler was not Jewish, but he is a Jewish hero, right? I mean, it's obviously a very different scenario, but I don't think that Jewish heroes must be limited to those who are Jewish.
Now, one of the things that I enjoy about books like this is the fact that it is updated. When you first published, we didn't have players like Ian Kinsler,
Mhm.
Ryan Braun. They were just coming up, and you rank these players, and Ian Kinsler, Ryan Braun shoot up to the top of the list. I think one of my favorites is Kevin Youkilis, uh, because of course nobody thought he was Jewish based on the last names, and that is one of the things when I was working at the Jewish News and I was doing the sports work, that you can't judge anybody by their name because of intermarriage, because of conversion, whatnot. Danny Valencia is another example of not going by last names.
Jose
Uh,
Bautista.
Dave Bautista wasn't one of the Alomars. Is one of the Alomars Jewish?
Don't believe so, but Ty
Okay.
Kelly is. Ty Kelly is
Ted
another
Kelly
name that
played
doesn't necessarily
for Team
assume.
Israel.
That's correct.
Uh, what did you learn, or did you learn anything between the books? And
Oh,
did your research change? Did what changed? What didn't change?
there's so much. So the book is obviously significantly bigger, but it's about 80% new material. And a couple of primary reasons for that. One is that sabermetrics has taken a quantum leap forward from the late 2000s to where we are today in terms of being able to measure between various eras and being able to get a sharper lens on what people are doing. Another area in which things have taken a quantum leap forward is the ability to access digitized archives in a way that I had the sporting news my first time around, but I have the ability to get to local newspapers across the country. Again and again, I was able to tell briefer stories about players' brief moments in the major leagues when I wrote about them in the first book. And in this book, I'm able to talk about people's lives, where they would go back to their hometowns after playing and what that was like, or they would have long and fruitful minor league careers. And you could read about the minor league teams that were being covered with a very close lens by newspapers of the time. And so being able to flesh out those stories, I had a lot of things I was able to address at the beginning of my first book, but I had a lot of questions I was able to answer by the end of my second book. And so there was a real sense of being able to fully flesh out people's lives who, in many cases, were elite baseball players who simply didn't get the opportunity to be able to play for more than a handful of games for various reasons, not excluding the fact that in some cases they suspected anti-Semitism, and in other cases, simply because for the first 70, 80 years of organized professional baseball, there were 8-team leagues, and it's just damn hard to break through.
That's an excellent point about having questions raised by the first book and being answered in the second. And just to prove your point about uh, a bigger book, this is the difference between the original on this one and the new version, which is significantly larger both in size and pages. Uh,
Yes.
you talk about players who might have had better careers if not for anti-Semitism. The two, well, one that immediately comes to mind is Mickey Rutner,
Yep.
uh,
Mhm.
who I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was the muse for Elliot Asinov's book Men on Spikes.
That's correct.
Uh, I had the good fortune to interview Lou Limmer many years
Ah,
ago. He
the
was
Babe Ruth of batting practice. Isn't that a great nickname?
uh, who knew Rutner, of course. They came along in the same era, and he talked about. And again, it might be just self-perception of anti-Semitism by their managers, by the organization, but certainly there were markets like the New York Giants always wanted to have a Jewish superstar, and they
Mhm.
passed on the opportunity to sign Hank Greenberg because they thought
Well,
he was too
yeah.
clumsy or too slow, whatever, and that was he didn't sign with the Yankees because they had Lou Gehrig, so it was Detroit's good fortune to be able to have him on their team.
A future left fielder as well. But to your point about anti-Semitism, it's very hard, right? So somebody like a Cy Block who was a terrific uh, line drive hitting third baseman in the Chicago Cubs organization. And Cy Block claimed to his dying day, I remember him telling Bill Mazer, who I had the privilege to get to know late in his life, that Charlie Grimm in Cy Block's view did not care for Jews. And it's very possible that that was a reason. But another reason, and a fairly good one from a baseball perspective, is Stan Hack was an incredible baseball player. Stan Hack, well into his mid to late 30s, was hitting well over 300 with on base percentages north of 400 and defending very well at third base. So it's a very difficult thing to prove in the same way that, Al Rosen had his career get off to a late start. Well, Ken Keltner, he's the one who single-handedly ended Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak. He was an elite third baseman. However, Norm Miller has about as ironclad case as you can imagine. Norm Miller, outfielder with Houston in the late 1960s. 1969, he's hitting 284 rather, with a 387 on base and a slugging percentage north of 400 during the year 1969. That was very pitcher friendly. It's just a year after the year of the pitcher. And then between June 12th and June 29th, he doesn't play at all. And he can't figure out what's going on. Years later, Norm was a broadcaster, and he had somebody who was in the Astros organization at that time tell him that Harry Walker said to him directly that I would never let a Jew be a star on my team. And
Wow.
he was benched for that reason. And you can see it. And it's one of these things where it lines up. He doesn't play from June 12th through June 29th. He's easily the best hitting outfielder on that team at that time. And that team had other very talented players, and ends up being a part-time player the rest of the year. And Norm had a fine career, but he never had the stardom that was predicted for him in some areas. And furthermore, he has this direct evidence that he was the victim of this. And so you cannot help but wonder again and again when you look at these Jewish ball players who excelled at the high levels of the minor leagues, what was at play? But in Norm's case, unfortunately, we know, and Harry Walker, brother of Dixie Walker, he certainly brings to life the old Jewish joke, which is you're at a funeral and there's a rabbi who says, can anyone, speak well on behalf of the deceased? And nobody says something. And the rabbi said, surely somebody can stand up and say something. And finally, somebody stands up and says, his brother was worse. Well, that's Dixie Walker and Harry Walker in whatever order you care to do it.
Mhm, mhm. Talk about the current generation of players. Ryan Braun retired.
Mhm.
Alex Bregman seems to have stepped in to fill the role of all-star slugger.
Mhm.
Kinsler is no longer playing. Talk about some of the new generation of Jewish ball players.
Well, and again, this goes back to another reason why I love this subject matter. The history of Jewish baseball goes back to the very beginning of baseball. There's a man named Nate Birkenstock who was born in 1832. A lot of people credit George Wright with being essentially the first or the oldest professional baseball player. Emmanuel found the Cincinnati Red Stockings, but George Wright, he's a spring chicken. He was born in 1835. Nate Birkenstock way back in 1832. And Birkenstock, who ended up playing with the Philadelphia Athletics, was Jewish. So when somebody asks, how far back does the history of Jewish baseball go? The answer is always. There has always been a Jewish presence in professional baseball. But we just had a World Series with 4 Jewish baseball players. We had Bregman, we had Max Fried, we had Jock Peterson, and we had Garrett Stubbs. And I mean, that's 40% of a million. That's pretty good. And my favorite play from that World Series is Fried pitches, Bregman hits a fly ball to right field, caught by Peterson, an entirely Jewish play from start to finish. But, Bregman, though he made an out there, he is about halfway to 55 wins above replacement at this point in his career. 55 is a magic number. That's right around where you find Hank Greenberg. That's right around where you find Sandy Koufax. It's an opportunity for Bregman, if he continues on this pace, to be able to state his claim as one of, if not the greatest Jewish baseball player in the history of the game. But Max Fried is doing things on the mound we haven't seen Jewish pitchers do for a long time. Until last year, the trivia question was, who was the most recent Jewish pitcher to win a World Series game? The answer was Ken Holtzman in 1974. Well, now the answer is Max Fried, who won the deciding game in the 2021 World Series. So the answer, who is the most recent Jewish pitcher to win a World Series game, is the same as who is the most recent pitcher to win a World Series game. And Fried did it in a year that he also won the Gold Glove, first of all, at pitcher, which is a very important, prestigious award for fielding, and an award that will forever remain in my heart. He is the last Silver Slugger at pitcher in the National League before they did that terrible thing and imposed the designated hitter on the National League. So he'll be a part of that trivia answer forever. But yeah, there are tremendously talented players for today, and there are tremendously talented players for tomorrow as well.
Yeah, he was like the last triple threat pitcher, I think. that
Exactly.
we're going to see.
Exactly.
So one of the things that you do in your book is you rank not only each position by position, but all time. So talk about your all-time list and how that has changed from the previous edition.
Hank Greenberg versus Sandy Koufax is complicated, right? Those are the two. Lou Boudreau is there as well, but a lot of Boudreau's value comes from fielding during a time that we really don't have precise ways of measuring fielding. So to me, it really does come back to Greenberg, Koufax, and Greenberg, and they couldn't be more different, right? Greenberg is an offensive player in the 1930s in a primarily offensive atmosphere. Sandy Koufax is a pitcher, and he's doing it in the 1960s, one of the heydays for pitching. We're able to use a lot of statistics like ERA plus and OPS plus to normalize for error. And then we can use things like wins above replacement to check position players versus pitchers. And they're within about a win of one another career-wise. Well, they also have these mitigating circumstances within their career that makes evaluating them as a whole different than your average player's career arc. In Hank Greenberg's case, he missed 4 full seasons fighting the Nazis. And I note this in the book, but Bill James might not give you extra points for fighting the Nazis. But if you're in a Jewish baseball book, you get extra points for fighting the Nazis. That's just how it is. Harry Danning is my all-time catcher, just ahead of Mike Lieberthal. They're neck and neck. But Harry Danning fought in World War II, and you get extra points. You just do. Now, Koufax ended his career at age 31, as I understand it, with an elbow issue that would be easily fixed with routine off-season surgery now. Koufax you would have gotten a little email if Koufax were pitching now. Sandy Koufax had this surgery. He'll be ready for spring training. And that would have been it. And instead, Koufax, one of the great peaks, ends in his prime at age 31. So deciding who's better and who's worse than that is a very difficult one. I have Greenberg ever so slightly ahead, simply by virtue of his service. But I think you can absolutely make the argument for either one of them. And then as you go around the diamond, like you said, there are some real changes. I have put Alex Bregman just ahead of Al Rosen. And part of that's what he's done already. And part of that is that Alex Bregman is on pace to blow away Rosen, which is not really fair to Rosen at some level, right? Rosen got, as we discussed, the late start because of Keltner. His back injury prematurely ended his career. Al Rosen, if he had been healthy, even with the late start, a clear Hall of Famer. Al Rosen's 1953 was as good a year as anybody has ever had at third base, Jewish or otherwise. And so that was a difficult call to make. At second base, it was not a difficult call to make. Ian Kinsler had a remarkable career, power, speed, gold glove defending. Ian Kinsler was a criminally underrated player by any measure. He's getting into the Texas Rangers Hall of Fame, and he was only there for part of his career, had a lot of his best years in Detroit, but Ian Kinsler was an easy addition to this roster as well.
Let's switch gears a little bit because I know how busy you are. We do not just do baseball. You're involved heavily in women's sports. Talk about what you do in that regard.
So I run The Nine, which is a women's sports newsletter across 6 different women's sports. You can get it at THEIX, the9sports.com. And I also run a women's basketball newsroom 24/7, 365 at thenexthoops.com. And the Next covers women's basketball at every level, college, high school, EuroLeague, and of course, the WNBA as well. So that's what gets me out of bed every morning, is covering women's sports for a number of different publications, but those 2 in particular, to try and build the infrastructure with the understanding that women's sports coverage is an everyday story. It's not an add-on.
So how did you get involved in that? Because this doesn't seem like, to be sexist, right off, doesn't seem like
Oh, hold
something
on.
that most men would
You
cover.
froze on me a little, Ron.
Can you hear me?
Uh-oh. What do we do here?
No, we just keep talking. Don't worry about the video part. You can hear me, right?
Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me? Uh-oh.
There we go. Can you hear me? Oh, now I can't hear you. I see you, but I can't hear
Now
you.
you can?
Now I got you. Yes.
I'll have to do a little editing there, but don't worry about it.
Sure. I'm sorry about that. If that was my end, I'm also going to look, see if I can prioritize the device to the extent that's able to help. Let's see, set priority device. All right. Here we go. I've even set it a priority device. I don't know what else to be doing. I'm the only one in the house, but okay. Yes, I'm here.
So now I see, I've never gotten this before, but I'm getting a message that I only have 10 minutes remaining. So that must be a new function of Zoom. So,
okay. All right.
So this is one of the problems with live, and it's live because I have no editing skills. So this will be amusing to everybody out there. So we were talking about why you think it's important to write about women's sports as a man.
And it needs to be an everyday story. So I built 2 things to do precisely that. The 9 newsletter, which you can see over at THEIXsports.com, covers it across 6 women's sports every single week. The Next, which is thenexthoops.com, is a women's basketball specific newsroom where we cover women's basketball at all levels 24/7. And I wanted to attack the twin problems of making it clear that women's sports is an everyday story and making sure that there are more people in our industry who don't look like me, and making sure that there is a pipeline for the talented women, and particularly women of color, who need the reps, who need the opportunities, who need the mentoring to be able to come up through our system and be able to participate in sports journalism and cover specifically women's sports in the process. And so that's why they both exist.
Admirable, very admirable. So we have been talking with Howard Megdal, author of the Baseball Talmud, the definitive position by position ranking of baseball's chosen players. Makes an excellent gift, just like my old book on Hank Greenberg seemed to be very popular for bar mitzvahs and around Hanukkah time. I think this will supplant it. as the new hot Jewish sports topic.
Nonsense. Together, they should both be part of it.
So Howard, thank you very much. Sei gesund, and I hope to be talking to you soon.
I look forward to it, Ron.